lecture video 434 through 447, talking about Northern economy. Lest talked about the New York draft riot and how things got out of hand in the North. Now we're going to talk about how things were going well in the North. Manufacturing was booming. New inventions were happening. Manufacturing efficiency goes well. Productivity of northern agriculture is going well. New farming machinery, everything is going well for the North. It's really just not fair for the South. The wages increase during the war, taxes go up, prices go up, and trade unions increase to help out the workers even more. But there is also lots of corruption, profiteering, swindling the government for anything and everything you can, selling crappy goods to the government. Just whatever you could do to make more money and scam the government was going on. The economy, however, fed, clothed, armed all the Union soldiers, as well as kept most civilians employed and happy and well fed. So that's an interesting aspect to this, whereas the South, it's just turmoil. More than 100,000 Northern women worked in various industries during the war. Women did everything. They expanded government bureaucracy. They were nurses, but thousands upon thousands of them were widowed, devastated, losing their husbands, their children, just whatever it was. I mean, it just was tough to be a woman in this time period. But there were some new great opportunities for them, including higher education. To keep schools open, a lot of higher education schools did not allow women, prior to this, allow women in to keep their schools open. Southern politics, Jefferson Davis just has his hands full. It's impossible. Things aren't going well. There's dissent. The reason why the Confederacy or the states seceded from the Union was because they wanted states' rights, and now there's no centralized authority. There's no political parties. Davis can't fall on party loyalty to say, hey, let's get all this stuff passed. Let's get things going. It's just a mess. No matter what Jefferson Davis does, it's just he struggles. Calls for peace come as early as 1863. Davis and other Confederates try to build a strong sense of Confederate nationalism, but they fail. They fail for the simple reason that, again, it's states' rights. They're worried about themselves. They're not worried about the Confederacy as a whole, which I find interesting in the fact that, people want to say they're proud to be a Southerner. They're proud to be, part of what was the Confederacy and fly a Confederate flag and blah, 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 blah. Yet, they didn't have a strong sense of nationalism back then. They're in the Bible Belt, South in the Bible Belt. It's hard for them to interpret their mounting losses. They believe that God is on their side, yet they're losing. And how do you differentiate that? Black Southerners find hope that there's confirmation that the war is a fulfillment of prophecy. Food is scarce. There's bread shortage. There's bread riots in almost every major city in the South. As the war progressed, soldiers had terrible uniforms. Their families suffered under similar conditions as garments are used by the Confederates, as the Confederate soldiers, as well as the Confederate people. They're taken from the Union soldiers, anything and everything they could. Both sides did some of the most unfortunate things. Atrocities of war are just brutal. Robbery, rape, and murder. Many slaves stopped working and they abandoned their plantations. Southern women did manage the plantation, work in the fields. Southern women also worked in factories making uniforms, munitions, government offices. They taught school. But as the war continued, they helped their husbands desert. Their relatives leave the Confederate authority, or elude Confederate authorities and hide them. By 1864, women are done. They're ready for the war to be over with, for the men that are left to eventually come home. Grant was finally appointed the commander of the Union forces. He coordinates the Union war effort and changes the tempo of war. He goes hammer, 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 hammer. He's going to hit them and keep hitting them and keep hitting them. He puts William T. Sherman in his place to advance through the South into Georgia. And his major focus, his being Grant's, will be catching Robert E. Lee. 3 major battles here. Battle of the Wilderness, Battle of Spotsylvania, and Battle of Cold Harbor. Grant goes after Lee and goes after Lee and goes after Lee. Tactically, they're all losses by the North because they lose so many more men. But strategically, they're wins because all he's doing is pushing Lee to where he wants him to go, pushing him farther south. He's going to trap him eventually, but he can keep losing lives. It doesn't really matter. He can lose more lives than Lee can. At the same point, around this same time, after quote-unquote losing Wilderness, Spotsylvania, and Cold Harbor, Sherman moves into Georgia and captures Atlanta. And so the South is basically being taken from underneath Lee. We'll come back to this. Presidential election of 1864, McClellan opposes Lincoln, the man that Lincoln, put in place in the head of the army and then removes him, then puts him back, and McClellan calls Lincoln a buffoon. I mean, quite ridiculous in my opinion. But the fall of Atlanta and later victories helps Lincoln beat McClellan, and then the 13th Amendment is passed, which outlaws slavery, which is what the Emancipation Proclamation is wrongly remembered for. Remember, the Emancipation Proclamation doesn't do anything. The 13th Amendment is what does it. It outlaws slavery. Okay, and then what breaks the back of the South, or the will of the South, is Sherman marches from Atlanta here all the way to Savannah and uses a strategy of total war. He burns, kills, blows up anything in his path. And then he will strategically move north up into North Carolina, and he will beat Johnson, and the South will be won. Now he'll just kind of move alongside if he needs to stop Lee, who's fighting up here in Virginia with Grant, from fleeing south. Confederate leaders proposed arming slaves, but slaves responded with little enthusiasm. No surprise. Lee's army is the only obstacle that remains for the Union. He abandons Richmond. Let's go back to here. So he abandons Richmond here. He heads to Petersburg. In Petersburg, he winters there from 1864 to 1865. Then he takes a last-ditch effort and runs westward. He's caught by Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia, where he will sign the surrender of the Confederacy. Washington celebrates. However, it is muted by the assassination of Lincoln a few days later. Here are all the major battles that took place 1861 to 1865, from the first Battle of Bull Run all the way through the Siege of Petersburg, which ends up ending the war at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia. There is a very quick ending to our reading lecture 434 through 447.